My junior high vocational test said that I should be working outside with people. And I mean, that fit with everything that I knew growing up. I was a good athlete. I loved the out of doors and walking, and I organized things like a track meet for kids in the neighborhood. But don't ask me to get up and talk in front of a group. That just wasn't who I was. And I had opportunities starting when I was in high school just to work at some camps that had started up for young people who were in trouble with the court system. And I mean, the stuff that I loved and knew how to do just became a part of that. But someplace in the middle of all of that, I heard somebody, really good campfire storyteller, tell a story, a goofy, campfire story at the at the campfire. And I just thought, I want to learn how to do that. And I did. I just took some story, maybe one that was written down, but I just started practicing, telling to the cat, telling when I was driving, and then and then I started running those camps. They were kind of travel camps, trip camps for living in tents and that. And I started making my own stories and telling them. Sometimes they were the, tune in again tomorrow, and sometimes they were just standalone stories. But there was a piece about the fort in the backyard, and to go in the fort, or maybe it was the tree house, but it was some construction, little building in the story. And to go in, you had to say the password. And of course, I'm telling the story, and this comes up different times. But then we'd stop, and I'd say, "Okay, now say the password with me." So I'm telling the story to this group who's kind of leaning into this story, and the password was Chemo Kaimo Darahan Mahimo, Mahaimo, Marumpside, Bumpadiddle, Soup Bag, Tiddawhiddle, Nip Cow, Nip Cat, Sinovich, Kaimio. I don't know where it came from. My friend Arnie, whose family grew up in Latvia and then came to live on the block next to us, he insisted it was swearing in Latvian, but this has never been confirmed. But anyway, so I told these stories, and whenever the fort would come up, you had to say the password to go in. And I've said before, when I decided to go into education, I thought, what would it? Well, that's another story, I guess. This is the thing that made me decide to go into education. I get drafted, came back and had to run camps a couple more years because I couldn't even get an interview with a broadcast station because I had no experience. And I several times ran into young people. I mean, this was at least 6, 7, maybe 10 years later. Get off a bus, and here's this young man, and this is the one with the password in it. He looks at me. He says, "Aren't you that guy that used to tell those stories at that camp?" And I said, "Well, I did, run some camps and tell stories. Which one?" He couldn't remember the name of the camp, but then he said, "Do you remember the password?" And I said, "Well, yeah. I mean, if I'm thinking of the same one you are, what is it?" And he goes, "Chemo, Kaimo, Darahan, Mahimo, Mahama," and just says the password that was in the stories I was telling. And I walked away from that. And I mean, it was kind of like, what do I do with this idea that I have of using storytelling and video as whatever, working with young people? I walked away from that, and some other experiences similar with running into former campers, and I started thinking, now wait a minute. these were kids, they were in trouble with the society, with the system, and then so they were having trouble learning, because that's what often happens. I said, what if you went into education and used really good stories that had strong values and were written well, not just the goofy, made up at the time campfire stories? What would happen if you did that? What would that do to learning for young people like that? And ultimately that led to making a decision. I didn't want to go to school anymore, but I had the GI Bill, and I decided to use the GI Bill and add a teaching certificate to what I already had. And, eventually ended up in education using storytelling and video as teaching tools. And of course, along the way, before I got drafted, I discovered the American Council of Better Broadcast, now National Telemedia Council. And so, started using that idea of, consciously being aware of media literacy. And when you're conscious of it, it becomes stronger than when it's just kind of there because of your experiences. So that's the way it is.